How's it going? I'm Reign of Tears, and on this broadcast, as I had mentioned on previous presentations that I've had, the two previous ones, I said that the next one that I would present would sort of go and delve into the whole zombie phenomenon. I'll give mention of significant movies that have been presented in the zombie genre. And I'll start with the first one, which you could say is sort of the grandfather of all of them. That would be White Zombie. That was made in 1932, and it starred Bela Lugosi in a non-vampire role. And basically what in this particular film, a young character had come to him and asked for Bela Lugosi's help. Bela Lugosi was playing as sort of a sorcerer type to make this, the young man wanted to have a girl that he really liked to fall in love with him. So Bela Lugosi and his character put a spell on him, on the girl rather, and unfortunately the girl became bewitched and became a zombie or living dead type of character. So that was like one of the first film presentations of the outline of a zombie. Now after that, in 1943, there was a film called I Walk with a Zombie, and that was actually on a Caribbean unnamed and fictional Caribbean plantation, and the surroundings were such that you could say that there were components that were real in terms of like there certain populations on some of the Caribbean islands like Haiti or whatever, which I'll get into a little bit later. But the tropes were sort of, you know, the standard stereotypical stuff in terms of how the natives were presented, and even in terms of being zombies. So you had to go all the way up to 1966. I mean, there were other films, but 1966 was a British film that was set in the 1860s in Cornwall, which is like a small village or town that's about 200 miles from London, England. And anyway, in this particular one, a villainous squire changed many of the residents that lived in the town into zombies. And so there were a couple of the denizens of the town that were trying to get the people released from the spell. And according to the research that I did on it, this was the first one where, in terms of like how the zombie is usually presented in modern times being in terms of like how most people view zombies now, this was the first one that presented them in this fashion in terms of how they acted and the makeup, etc. And I actually saw that it's pretty interesting movie. Now that leads up into 2 years later, which is in the well-known and classic George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. The Night of the Living Dead was groundbreaking in many manners. One of the manners is that it was the first one to present a black lead by the foundational Black American, the late foundational Black American, definitely underrated, Mr. Dwayne Jones. And Dwayne Jones' character that he played was anything like the shuffling, scared Negro, so to speak, trope. I mean, he was a very in-charge type individual, as he led a small group of survivors, I should say, who had ended up being housed in a small farmhouse, and they were trying to survive the night as some zombies were greatly approaching. I think many people, probably most people that are watching the video now, my video now, are familiar with the plot line and have seen the movie many times, so I don't need to get into that. But it also paralleled eerily things that were going on in the times. 1968 was a great time of social unrest, especially in terms of the civil rights era. That's also the year that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Also later that year, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. So, and in terms of like how this movie ended, and even though, as I've indicated, most people that probably have seen this or watching my broadcast, I'm not going to say what happened, but let's just say that the shocking ending you could say paralleled the demise of those two individuals that I'd made reference to, the famous individuals in American history. So that was a groundbreaking film in that manner. It was it was a cheaply made movie, but even though it was cheaply made, it was still George A. Romero presented the horrific aspects and the tear and the fear from the vantage points of being shown from the characters in the movie, and how that was able to be shown to the audience that saw the movie, if they saw it at a theater or whatever, was wonderful. It was astounding. So we're going to go all the way to 1978, and then of course another masterpiece by George A. Romero, his second zombie film, Dawn of the Dead. Now this is the original one. This one had Ken Foree. Ken Foree, the name may not be familiar, but this brother, this black man, foundational black American man, has been in many horror films, many that went straight to streaming or video or whatever. But this also had the social implications too. The racial components, racial animosity, social unrest, which was also going on, and also sort of like a view of commercialism as the principal characters in the movies ended up holding up in a shopping mall, and how some of the aspects of capitalism and consumerism were sort of mocked in a very classic manner. It was a sight to behold. So again, Dawn of the Dead, the original one in 1978. Most people, like I said, have seen that, that are looking at this now. But if you haven't, that's one that you should definitely try to stream. Then we go to 1981, and this is one I saw it the first time when it came out. The Evil Dead, the first one with Bruce Campbell. And Bruce Campbell, he's sort of a cult. This is a cult movie. He's a cult actor. He's been in a lot of things too. His name may not be familiar to a lot of people, but if you see his face, he's someone that's been a lot of different films. But anyway, this one was where a group of young college students went on a trip, and they went to a old lounge out in the woods, a log home out in the woods, and they stumbled upon finding a book that had spells in it, and one of the kids jokingly chanted some of the spells and incantations, and which started to cause the evil spirits to arise and slowly infect members of the group that went out, to the point where Bruce Campbell was the only survivor. It was kind of campy in a way. I mean, very bloody, horrific, campy, witty dialogue. That would be one, if you haven't seen that, I would advise you to check out. Then we have The Reanimator, which came out in 1985. That was also sort of in the horror comedy vein, where a mad doctor was sort of reanimating individuals. So they were, you could say, obviously since they were coming back to life, they were zombies in that sense. And you also had the other spoofy Dead films. There were several of them, Return of the Living Dead, and several symbols after that, but they were more in the horror vein, similar to Night of the Living Dead, but more of a spoof and more of a comedy vein, and pretty bloody, easily to find streaming online. Then we go to 1988, and one that I really like and I highly recommend is Serpent in the Rainbow. Serpent in the Rainbow, with Bill Pullman and Kathy Tyson. And this one is groundbreaking in many ways, because many people, as I had made allusion to it earlier when I first started my video presentation, on many people, or some people on some of the Caribbean islands like Haiti and in the Dominican Republic and other places, or even in Mexico or whatever, there's a small segment of the population that sort of believe in the spirits and Santeria. I mean, they have different names, but it's both a variation of the same thing, including being able to have people rise from the dead and come out from their grave. And this one was very respectful in terms of how that aspect, of course, I mean, it's, it's unrealistic in the sense that, zombies were coming back to life, but not getting too tangential. Actually, there were cases in Haiti where people were medically diagnosed as having expired, but they weren't really expired. And so when they came back, and it wasn't like days later or being buried for years or whatever, but just came back shortly afterwards, it was sort of like a misdiagnosis. And so, and people that, weren't knowledgeable or not highly educated or whatever, assumed that these were zombies. But again, that sort of this movie sort of was more faithful and more looked at the aspects of the cultural aspects of this in not in a mocking tone, but in a more serious, respectful tone. So that's one thing that I can appreciate about that too. So that's Serpent and the Rainbow, which brings us up to 2002. I sort of talked about this one 28 days later in a couple of my previous broadcasts. This one, though they were not technically dead, as I also alluded to too, it was like a virus that had been unleashed accidentally in a laboratory called Rage, and it made the individuals that were infected become like homicidal maniacs, where they were actually, as indicated, killing people in a very wanton manner, more so than trying to eat them or whatever, but still, it was something that it infected the whole world basically, and there were only a few survivors. One of the survivors being Naomi Harris, an actress that came on to greater fame, as I had alluded to, in Bond movies and Pirates of the Caribbean, and Cillian Murphy, who is also garnered a lot of fame. And these were both starring vehicles for both of those actors. But it was groundbreaking in many ways, because this was the first advent of the quote-unquote fast zombies, even though, as I've just mentioned, they weren't really zombies per se, but fast people that were infected, I'll put it that way. And interesting story about that is that the director actually hired former athletes and athletes in the role of these individuals to really give it some realism. So like when these people were chasing after the characters in the film, I mean, they really were fast for real, so that sort of get that heightened realism. So 28 days later, there was actually a sequel to that in 2007 called 28 Months Later. And there has been some recent talk recently where, including the original actor Cillian Murphy, I'm not sure about Naomi Harris, actually being interested in doing a 28, years later. That would be logical since they went from days, months. So, I hope that happens. That would be awesome. And then, of course, I alluded to, there's some films, like I said, those Return of the Living Dead from the 80s that had a lot of comic structure as well as the horror aspects. Definitely, you can say that with the British film Shaun of the Dead, which followed the familiar trope where people were getting infected. The two main characters were basically like slackers and losers, grown men that still hadn't gotten their lives together. And through the early part of the movie, they were so out of it that they were oblivious that a zombie phenomenon was going through parts of England, and they didn't even realize it. So very entertaining, very well done movie, Shaun of the Dead, that came out in 2004. Skipping around a little bit, even Quentin Tarantino got a little bit in the zombie genre. He made a movie called Planet Terror. Actually, Planet Terror originally was a double feature associated with a film called Death Proof, but then it was re-released on its own accord, and this was filled with stars. I mean, Bruce Willis was in that. Had a nice scene where I won't say too much, excuse me, but that's Planet Terror. That came out in 2007. There was also some foreign influence. Spanish film called Wreck was one of the first ones to have the found footage, type thing like the Blair Witch Project from years back, a few years back from that. But this was the first time this was actually really done in a zombie film where, you know, people in an apartment were slowly turning into becoming zombified, and a few of the people that were non-zombies had to hold them out. They weren't getting any help. They were basically locked in to the apartment complex by military forces. So I would recommend that one too. Then we move on to 2013 with Brad Pitt's World War Z, based on the novel. It was a pretty ambitious movie. Brad Pitt played a scientist slash military agent who was going around the world trying to find the cause and try to find the cure to combat the zombieism that was infecting the whole world, not just the United States. And very action-packed, very long, but very enjoyable, very entertaining. And then, of course, in 2016, South Korea has also had a lot of good zombie films recently, but the most notable one, most well-known one to date, is the Train to Busan. Train to Busan was very well done. It starred a callous, it was about a callous businessman who was sort of indifferent to his little daughter, and, you know, self-centered. But circumstances were such that once that part of the world became infected with zombies, he was on the train with some other characters, past passengers that were forced to form a bond. So very well done, very good characters of development in my view, because the character who was initially selfish, you know, he as time went on in the film, he slowly became very protective for obvious reasons, but also in terms of really realizing, perhaps too late, what the important things were in life beside money. So that finally leads up to 2021's Army of the Dead, which made the director Zack Snyder's return. He was the one that had directed the 2004 remake of Dawn of the Dead. He did the Army of the Dead, where there was a planned bank robbery by some soldiers of fortune and other former friends banded together to try to rob a bank in Las Vegas, which had been infected by zombies, and it actually had been walled off. So this one's also a lengthy film, but it's enjoyable. You know, it had mixed reviews. Some people didn't like it. I liked it. I enjoyed it. So this is sort of like my condensed version of the history of zombie films. Of course, there were many others. What I pinpointed were some of the more significant ones that made an impact, and ones that were well known. But if you search online, which I'm sure people will do, there are many other movies that are known as well as unknown that you can enjoy for those that are into the zombie genre. So hope that you have appreciated this broadcast. I've enjoyed bringing this information to you. I want you guys to take care, and as always, have a good life. Till the next time.